Hey there, welcome back to the Futurists. I'm Rob Tercek with Brett King. We are co-hosting today, and we have a special guest who's going to talk to us all about cybersecurity. Welcome to the show, Tyler Cohen Wood. Hey, Brett, tell me a
Thank
little bit
you.
about her background.
Sure. So, Tyler's a renowned cybersecurity and tech influencer over 2 decades of experience, including more than a decade working with the Department of Defense. Her new company, Dark Kryptonite, also currently advises various defense and intelligence organizations. So that's pretty cool. We're definitely going to get into cybersecurity. In terms of a bit of history, she was the former deputy division chief at the U.S. Department of Defense. She
Hmm.
runs also a podcast, a couple of podcasts, one right now on health, which is called Health Exposed podcast.
Mhm.
And it's great to have you on the show, Tyler. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. And I'm very jealous of your background, Brett. I'm sorry, I just am.
Yeah, it gets it. I guess you got to try and when you're doing something like this, I want to sort of bring some cyber bling to it, right?
Oh, you've
So
done that.
Hey, Tyler, to start the show, please explain to us why all of a sudden all the Windows machines in the world stopped working a week ago.
Well, it was due to a update that CrowdStrike made to Windows machines, and it caused this incredible outage and disruption. And I have to tell you, when I first heard about it, I was terrified that it was a hack because if that
yeah,
had been
yeah, me
hacked,
too.
that would have been horrible. I mean, it's bad
It,
what's
it looked like
happened.
that initially, right? Because
It
Yeah.
did.
machines
I was
stopped working,
really scared.
airplanes stopped flying, companies couldn't work, people couldn't open the doors in offices. It was quite striking how widespread it was. But you're
It
telling me
really
that
was.
this company did a software update. That happens routinely. Companies push out patches and updates all the time. What went wrong?
I really don't know because, traditionally, if a company is going to do an update, a mass update, they do it in a staging environment, which is like a practice environment first to see what happens. And, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that they did that, but they just may not have known exactly what the reach was. And
Yeah.
again, it was really scary for a lot of companies and for a lot of people too.
And so
Was there specific versions of Windows that were affected, like XP or older versions of Windows, or was it just a broad infrastructure thing?
I mean, I don't know if Windows XP is still really being used that much,
That
but
was my sort of question, because a lot of like access control systems, even some of the nuclear power stations in the US run on XP.
they do.
Still,
Oh,
yeah.
that's
Like from
it,
an
it,
infrastructure perspective, it's appalling, right?
it's extremely scary because you're absolutely right, and I didn't even think about the legacy critical infrastructure. There's a lot of systems that they are in compliance with almost nothing, but we still need to use those legacy systems because of the tasks that they do.
And
And
there's not a lot of incentive for these incumbent legacy players to update these systems when they've got, such big like oligopolies, right? Not monopolies. We talk about this often on the show, but
yeah, I mean, it is. It's difficult, and it would be probably incredibly expensive too. So the solution to that problem has to be something different because you could have a legacy system that is completely insecure, compliant with nothing. Some of these systems, I guess, may be safe because they're so obscure with the coding, like if they're run by Fortran or something like that. But
but if they're online, they're vulnerable.
they're vulnerable, yes.
yeah.
8 years ago, I wrote a book about this subject about hyperconnectivity and dematerialization, and at the time, I noticed that we were broadening the attack surface by connecting everything that possibly could be connected. Most people tend to think about their mobile phone and their computer, maybe their smart TV, but even there, we stop to think, oh, actually, that television set is connected.
Yep,
In our homes, we've got smart devices. They're so-called smart devices. To my mind, anything with the word smart in front of it is actually just vulnerable. So instead of a smart
exactly.
device, it's a vulnerable device. You've got a smart door lock, that's a vulnerable door lock. You've got a
Yep,
smart light, that's a vulnerable light. And very often these devices are low cost devices. They're made in cheap manufacturing places in Asia. They might be, these are hardware companies that are not great at software. They might be using a Linux distribution that's 4 years out of date, and
Right.
hasn't been patched, and there's no way to patch it. So that's home IoT. But at the same time, we've also been networking critical infrastructure, things like utilities, public plants, and the same issues apply, except that the vulnerabilities are bigger and the consequences of failure
Are
could be
even bigger.
disastrous.
That's true. And the solution to that problem is really taking that critical infrastructure and those IoT devices, especially the ones that, really just are not as secure, because as you know, IoT devices are not all created equally in terms of security and updates and patches. So if you take those devices and if you wrap them into something that protects them, then it's going to be a lot more productive, and it's going to be open to significantly less capabilities.
So Tyler, we're obviously talking about vulnerabilities in the system. You just said anybody that's on the web as a web interface is at some point going to have security issues. We see all this ransomware stuff happening right now. We see the CrowdStrike failure and so forth. But we obviously need to start thinking about critical infrastructure. It's going to be connected. It's going to be integrated with artificial intelligence.
Yep.
So we really have to start thinking about this new layer of cybersecurity. So tell us about what you're doing at Dark Kryptonite, and also this concept of these special programs or comps that you talk about.
Sure. So special comms, I realized the bad guys were really utilizing that, and I thought
So
that
what is that? What is a special comp?
so when I was at the Defense Intelligence Agency, I worked in special comms, and special comms is different than secure comms, because secure comms, you can still see encrypted traffic, you can still see something is happening. But with special comms, think of a very high threat mission in a high threat country where that country has access to everything that's happening on their networks. And
Right.
those devices have to look and feel like their cover story, but at the same time, they have to be able to
Oh, right.
communicate out
Yeah, we did talk about this.
utilizing different channels, so that they remain, either their traffic is hidden within the noise of the other noise, or that it's completely off the grid. And it's an interesting way of really looking at the problem, because I hate to say it, but I'm going to. The internet was never designed to be secure, and we have been putting bandages and bandages and bandages on a gaping wound, and it is never going to work. And
Right.
not all data has to be secure to this like crazy level, but some of it actually does. And
Yeah.
especially when you're talking about critical infrastructure, which is very vulnerable, you need to have these other levels and layers of protection.
Yeah.
And so
Why is critical infrastructure so vulnerable? This is not a new problem. We've been aware of this problem since the Y2K phenomenon. That was
We're not
15 years ago.
investing in it. We're not investing in the solutions.
No, we're really not, and it's a huge problem. I mean, go back to CrowdStrike. I thought that was a hack, and I was really scared. And even though it wasn't, don't think for 2 seconds that nation state actors did not watch and notice that, because they
Yeah,
did.
right.
They
That was
did.
almost like an advertisement. Pay
Yeah,
attention to this hack. Though there's also no consequences. This is my issue. You can take down the
yeah,
entire network, you can shut down airlines, you can disrupt traffic across the country, and nothing happens. Or if you get a penalty, it's a slap on the wrist.
right.
We spent the past decade having data breaches at the scale of billions of records, billions with a
Yeah.
B of records being spilled. And government fines, if there are any consequences, we're in the small, like single digit millions of dollars as a penalty. And I've often thought, well, why don't they just charge $10 per record lost and watch? These companies will all of a sudden escalate cybersecurity to be a top priority, because the chief financial officer of the company will see that it's going to cost him more money to have a vulnerability than it is to patch it. That's really, market economics is the way to solve this problem. And also, there's a value on people's data, and there's also a value on people's time. How many times a year do you get an alert from your credit card company or some other organization that you have to change your password once again because they've had a data breach?
Yeah.
If millions of people have to go through that process over and over again.
But passwords are part
Yeah.
of the problem. Like,
Yeah, why
come
do we
on,
have passwords?
well, it's because, if you want the next layer of cybersecurity protection in the experience layer would probably be the use of biometrics. And we've seen it work very well in places like China. So
Well,
China's been able to radically reduce
this ain't in
fraud, for
China.
example. Yeah.
I got
The
biometrics on this thing.
secure
It's got face
secure
recognition.
element, yeah, but it's not a the US doesn't like to do mandate standards for this stuff, right? Whereas China has mandated, for example, facial recognition for critical infrastructure, particularly in the financial services industry, right? But the US would never do that because it's a state versus federal issue. But it needs to happen. If you look at I mean, digital identity is a requirement for the adequate operation of 21st century systems. I mean, Tyler, you
Absolutely.
agree?
But ultimately, isn't the problem people? I mean, isn't the problem that people are too
Well,
lazy to
you'll
change their
social engineer
passwords?
anything, right? The weakest link in a system is the human. I mean, that's
Yeah.
cybersecurity 101. I'm sorry. I'm
It
Tyler,
You're
you
doing the
jump in.
show. You're doing the show,
Yeah,
Brett. I
Tyler,
should
you
interview
jump
you.
in.
no,
So, Mr.
he's
Mr.
100%
King, how long have you been
right
a
though.
cybersecurity expert?
Well, I used to be I used to run for HSBC, the anti-phishing working group chapter. So I
There
have a
you
little bit
go.
of experience, but yeah.
All right,
But I
sorry,
wouldn't call
But
myself
we're
a
not letting you do the
cybersecurity
show. I'm
expert.
so sorry,
No,
Tyler.
he is. No, you guys are awesome. No, he is. He's right though. I mean, that is the traditional vector that lets people into the network. It's humans because it's easy to social engineer humans. And these hackers, they're very good at what they do. And there's a lot of psychology involved too, because when a phishing attack is going to consist of fear, urgency, and your good nature. And if and it shocks me sometimes just how well this works. I mean, I almost fell for one of them myself until it became so ridiculous that I was like, this doesn't sound right. Because the problem is we're humans and we're not always at our best and we're not always thinking about cybersecurity. And I'll give you an example. A really good friend of mine, she's a really smart woman. She's not in cybersecurity, she's in the legal profession, but she got a call and she freaked out. And I'll tell you what happened. She called me and she said, I'm in a lot of trouble. The CIA thinks that I'm a part of this Amazon fraud. And that just didn't sound right. And so I said, can you tell me more, like what's going on? And she said she got a call from the CIA that her Amazon account was being used for fraudulent activity.
The
And
CIA. And she thought
yes.
this was a normal call. Hello, hi, we're calling from the CIA. We just wanted to alert you that we've been monitoring your Amazon account and we've noticed some unusual activity on your account. Please give us your password to your bank account so that we can double check.
Well, it
I mean,
wasn't quite the
seriously,
bank
that's what she
account.
fell for?
She did, yes.
Okay, but you did
And
say she's a smart person. I'm sorry, I'm totally trashing your friend now. This is like the
And
most hostile show
it
we've
was Rakesh from the cybersecurity department at the CIA.
well, but she actually asked if they would send a photo of their badge, and they did. And
Wow.
I had her send that to me just so I could check out the exit data, and it was completely generated. It was not real. But this is where it got interesting. She was so scared when they told her the only way she could prove that she was not involved in this fraudulent activity was to buy 3 Amazon gift cards. And
and
Oh
send them
my
to the
God.
CIA.
I hate to laugh
Send them
about
to the
it, but
CIA. I know.
but
I
you
know,
know,
but this is the thing. People don't. They're not aware of this stuff, right?
Yeah, people are
And
busy and distracted, and
yeah,
there's plenty of stuff to worry about.
and
You
suddenly,
know,
if they've got a threat to their finances, you go into flight or fight mode. Yeah, yeah.
Tyler, a
exactly,
couple
that's
months
it.
ago, we had Carl Brogan on the show, and he's a deep fake expert. And he went through the whole show, the whole episode. And at the very end, he said, "Oh, by the way, this isn't what I actually look like." And he removed the deep fake that he had been using for the entire show to show us that he looks completely different.
Yeah, it was a
He had
pretty
put
cool,
on like a
cool
Steve
effect.
Harvey mask, if you will,
Yeah,
and sort of animated it.
digital. Yeah.
And his point was very simple. He said, this is the last year that you'll be able to trust the people that you're talking to on a Zoom call are actually the people they say they are. And we
Exactly.
saw a big example of that just a few months back in Hong Kong. There was a financial security company where, the CFO of the company was in London, and the person working in Hong Kong got a message to join a Zoom call, and the entire finance department was there. And they said, look, we need you to make this wire transfer of $25 million, and you have to do it today. It's urgent. And it was the CFO talking to him. So the guy did it. And after the call, he realized that everybody on that call was a deep fake. So this is the world that we're in right now.
It is. It is. And in that type of situation, there's a few things you can do. One of them is not even technical at all. And that is you have a code word. And if they don't know the code word, you're not sending the money.
Yeah.
And, to get back to dark kryptonite, that is actually the reason that we developed it, is because if you're utilizing dark kryptonite, you're not on you're off the grid. You're not on the public internet anymore. You're utilizing different technologies and mechanisms to be able to share data and store data and communicate, through alternative channels where you're not connecting to an IP address, you're actually connecting to hashes. And those can be changed on the fly. And when you're utilizing that closed loop ring, you're not bound by DNS. If ransomware gets into the system, which it really wouldn't, it's not going to do anything because it's such a different type of infrastructure that ransomware is not going to work. It needs specific things. It needs to be able to escalate its privileges and this and this and this. But in this type of environment, that just doesn't exist.
So it's like a private network that you're proposing to create, a secure network that's separate from the internet.
Yes.
And then how do you interface with the internet? Are there like gateways or portals that you can control and monitor traffic on?
Well, when you're connecting to the network, you are containerized from the rest of the laptop, the rest of the computer. So you're in this network. And when you're in this network, again, you're not connecting to IP addresses, you're connecting to hashes. And you can actually do access controls too. And you can say the finance department can work with this hash, the HR department can work with this hash. And, essentially, you're taking back control of your network, and you can change these hashes on the fly.
So you're literally saying the computer, you can only connect with these computers. You're actually shrinking the number of computers it can connect to.
I don't know if you guys are familiar with Cyberpunk 2077, but in Cyberpunk 2077, Mike Pondsmith, we talked about it on the show before. Mike Pondsmith, basically, he proposes that the internet's going to be broken up into these big intranets, essentially, owned by the corpos or owned by governments. That sounds
kind of like what dark kryptonite is supposed to do.
Yeah.
One more example of science fiction being a little bit ahead.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I thought. It just sounds a lot like that to me,
Well, and you can actually email back and forth, but you're not using domains. So you can use it for storage and nobody knows where it is. You can also utilize it to take those legacy IoT devices that are in compliance with nothing and put them in the dark kryptonite network. And they're now in compliance with most things aside from some of the specific things like cybersecurity awareness training. We don't do that. But you take a very insecure critical piece of infrastructure, wrap it into this network, and it's now secure and under your control. And it's interesting too, because you can email, you can video conference, you can do anything that you do on the internet. It's just now you're off the grid in this protected enclave.
So it's a little bit like building private communities in California where you've got a guardhouse and you can get everything done there. You can go to the little friendly store and buy the things that you need. There's a pool and a rec center that you can go to. And then if you have to go out into the scary world, they open the portcullis and you drive out into the scary world and you go to the mall, another protected environment. And then you go to the children's school, another protected environment, and then you bring everybody home. So unfortunately, we're turning the internet, which used to be this wild open space where you could connect to anybody. We're kind of dividing it up into a subdivision of like Southern California. I don't know if I
Yeah.
love that vision, but maybe it's necessary because there are bad
It,
people out
I
there.
might be. I mean, AI
It
might be
is.
able to bridge that, but yeah, it's still interesting to sort of think of. I mean, that's been happening for a while. If you think about the Great Firewall in China and so forth, you know, there
Yeah,
are
the
different.
splinternet. That's
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
exactly.
Now we're going to splinter it
So
even more. Okay,
and
on
you
that
know,
note,
if you've got
let's take a
security
break.
issues,
Let's
yeah.
head off to a break. We're going to listen to a message from our sponsors. We'll be right back with Tyler Cohen Wood, more on cybersecurity and the futurists in just a minute. Okay, so we have a little break here. So Tyler, how are you feeling about this conversation? We'll clean up we'll edit out the bits where we were kind of like where we
It's
Tossing
okay.
back
You
and
don't,
forth.
yeah.
sections.
Okay. Yeah, I know.
Um,
It's amazing what you can do in editing. It really is.
and Kevin's great. Yeah,
No,
he's
it's been a good conversation. It's just we need to and my apologies about the special comms thing. I was
we kind of threw you off there. We were
Oh
horsing around.
no.
Sorry.
yeah.
Part of our job is to make the
Right.
show fun. I want to talk about complexity because another aspect of this, besides the human element, is that we're just making the world a lot more complicated because everything's hyper connected, and that is a compounding problem. And
We
Yeah.
haven't really talked about AI yet either. So
no,
Yeah,
we
we
need
need,
to
I was just thinking
yeah,
that we kind of should probably go there.
yeah.
cool. Okay, great. Let's bring it back, and then and we'll continue. Here,
Okay.
I'll bring it back. Hey there, you're listening to The Futurists. It's Rob Tercek and Brett King. This week, we're talking to Tyler Cohen Wood, a cybersecurity expert. And Tyler, just before the break, we were talking about the human element. The weakest link in the network is the
Yes.
people who use it. That's true. People are lazy and busy and distracted and easy to scare. So that's one way to find a vulnerability in the network. But there's another aspect that seems to be growing, which is complexity. As we connect
Yes.
more and more devices that are capable of doing more and more things, this creates vulnerabilities, effectively spreading the attack surface out so broad that no one person can be aware of all the possible vectors of attack. Talk to us a little bit about complexity, because I think that goes back to the CrowdStrike problem we talked about at the beginning of the
It
show.
does. It really does. I mean, the more connected devices you have, the greater the attack surface is. And, I think of people as little walking attack surfaces because, we have our phone, which has everything about us on it. Not only that, but it controls a lot of the things that we do. We have our watches. I think you even said this earlier. We have the smart TVs, we have the smart refrigerators, mattresses,
Mm.
socks. There's even smart socks.
Great.
Yeah, and we're not even talking about Neuralink yet, right?
No.
And like, brain control interfaces and things like that, like yeah, it's interesting.
And
So
with
that's
the
people, right? People are loading themselves up with stuff, but also this is happening invisibly in infrastructure, corporate infrastructure, public infrastructure, municipal infrastructure. All these systems are also connected. And as we mentioned earlier, sometimes they're not using the most up-to-date software. And candidly, sometimes it's very hard to update those systems. They're
It
not
is.
necessarily easy to patch. So that's a growing attack surface as well. I think for the benefit of the audience, it's a good point to think about here is it's a bit like living in a walled city. When you think about cybersecurity, if you're inside the walls, you have to be worried about the entire wall and the integrity
Right.
of the entire wall. If you're attacking, all you need to do is find one loose spot or one
Yep.
open spot that's not protected. And so it's an asymmetrical problem in the sense that the people inside the castle have to worry about everything, which is
Yep.
impossible.
It's
And the
impossible.
people attacking the castle only have to find one vulnerability and then they're in.
I like to use this analogy. It's like having a car where you take the steering wheel, the engine, the seats, the wheels off the car, and people aren't going to really steal it, but you can't use it either. So it's like walking a tightrope, with no safety net. You have to find that balance, and it's incredibly hard to do, especially in today's environment. Things were different in the old days of 2022 when AI wasn't extremely mainstream, but it is now, and it's added to a lot of the complexity. There's a lot of incredible things that AI is doing and is going to do, but again, it's a game of catch up where you have the threat actors using AI and we're using AI. And
Who's ahead in that battle right now? Are the defenders winning the AI battle, or are the attackers using
I
AI more
think it's
effectively?
too soon to tell.
Hmm.
I think it's too soon. You know, if you think back to 2022, AI was not on everybody's mind. It hadn't exploded yet. I mean, it exploded in 2023 and now it's really mainstream. And, you know, again, like I said, there's so many benefits to it and there's so many great use cases for it. And I'm excited by a lot of them, especially in healthcare, you know, but at the same time, you know, I think maybe we should slow things down a little bit and make sure that we know what our actions of today are going to lead to tomorrow.
So one
Tyler,
of the
I
things,
do.
yeah, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. You know, you've done a lot of work with the U.S. government. You know, you've been at the White House and advised the White House. That's pretty trippy experience, having done it personally myself, visiting the White House. But I wanted to sort of tap into your experience more from a policy perspective, because we're not really seeing either of the candidates talk about artificial intelligence right now. And clearly, the market is very focused on it. They're pushing hard towards this. If you look at China's use of industrial artificial intelligence, you know, and what they're doing in terms of infrastructure with solar and so forth, they seem to be way ahead. But there's obviously going to be a sort of arms race that happens in terms of autonomous systems and so forth. But you know, it clearly needs an infrastructure approach to this. It needs to be planned. It's like you
Yes.
know, Rob mentioned municipal planning or whatever, right? You know, it's like city planning now. We have to start thinking about digital identity infrastructure, and you know, how quantum is going to come into the mix, and how AI is going to be safe. And you know, obviously we're dealing with copyright issues and things like that at the
Oh, yeah.
moment, right?
That's a whole other
Right.
episode.
But yeah, exactly. But you know, sort of from a policy perspective, is there either of the candidates, you know, that you think is in the US, or which other governments or regulatory bodies outside of the US do you see really thinking about this, you know, cybersecurity as an infrastructure issue?
You know, it's really hard to say. Um, you know, it almost seems like you know, the two presidential candidates, you know, this just isn't something that is, like you said, really being talked about because, you know, there's a lot of focus on other issues. And, you know, that in of itself can
It's
be kind
easier to demonize
Well,
immigrants than it is
hang
to
on. I
talk
mean,
about the
yeah,
weaknesses in the
yeah.
cybersecurity
hang on
infrastructure.
for a
And
second.
AI
Hang
is
on.
not a bad
There's a
thing.
pretty significant example here that's fairly recent. The CHIPS Act, which is a bipartisan act that President Biden
Yeah.
signed,
Right, yes.
allocated trillions of dollars for infrastructure upgrades. They were all around cyber and high tech industries, and there was a significant element of that that was
Yeah.
about hardened infrastructure and security, and also independence and resilience in the networks. So it's not right to assert that nothing's being
No,
done. Actually, I
okay.
think the
No, no,
United
no.
States government
Right,
Yeah.
does a
right.
fair
But
job of this.
I think Brett meant specific to AI.
Yeah. And
Oh yeah,
things
we
like
don't have a
quantum, right?
great policy there.
Future tech. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like emerging digital autonomous infrastructure. That's really
yeah,
what I'm sort of thinking about. So it is
yeah.
AI based stuff, you know.
It's a tough job for politicians to get ahead of emerging sectors, though, right? Because they're
No,
in
I
reactive
know.
mode.
It's
They usually
it's
react to
really
circumstances.
difficult.
They
Yeah.
can't really.
Yeah, they just like get out of the way of the market doing this. But this is an infrastructure thing. You wouldn't have expected the market to build railways and highways in the old days, right? It has to be core social infrastructure. I don't think we think about artificial intelligence like that unless it's sort of military application, right?
Yeah.
So it does
But
sound like the U.S. military is on it, though, right? They seem to do pretty good. You never hear about what they're doing. They're very quiet about it, and
yeah,
they
that
understand the
is
consequences very well, right? So they're at the very front line. And it does seem to me, based on the war in the Ukraine right now, that there's a lot of innovation happening on both sides. You know, where people are using in new types of devices, new network devices, new kinds of networks, and new ways to prevent or interfere with the signals to
great.
stop those attacks.
Yeah.
So
I
that's an
mean,
area of innovation.
it really is. It's exciting in some ways. And, you know, especially for me in particular, when I think about healthcare and just how it can really assist, you know, doctors and other healthcare professionals by doing tasks that, you know, the doctors, because they're human, just don't have the ability to do as quickly. Like, uh, going through all of a patient's records quickly and putting together an assessment so things don't, fall out of the
applying
loop.
DNA records to
Mhm.
the diagnosis.
Yeah,
So
but
Yeah.
every one of those capabilities that can be used for good can also be used by the bad
for
guys. So
evil.
the ability of AI, for instance, to recognize patterns and track patterns and do that at a larger scale than any human could,
Yeah.
that's almost
Hey,
certainly being
Tyler,
deployed right now.
I want to just take a step back here,
Uh-huh.
because you've been doing this healthcare podcast. So how did you go from cybersecurity to healthcare? Like, tell us about that transition.
Um,
Because obviously you're really interested in the future state of healthcare. I saw you had Evan Kirstel on the other day and stuff like that talking about this. It's something we often talk about on the show. So this is a real futurist topic, longevity and
it
next
is,
gen
it is.
healthcare medicine 3.0.
I mean, I hate to say it, but I'm actually switching my podcast to My Connected Life again, because that way I can incorporate anything connected,
Right.
including just healthcare. Um, and I can't believe I'm gonna say this here, but I'm gonna start a podcast on dogs with my dog.
Wolf.
I know, right?
There you go.
But the reason that I got so interested in healthcare is because I got sick. And
Okay. Was this the
I
long COVID stuff?
no, that came later. I actually
Okay.
got sick in 2018. And interestingly enough, I I just assume that when you get sick, you go to the doctor and they tell you what's wrong and they give you a pill or say,
Mm,
just call me in a few days or whatever. But that's not what happened, because I fall into the very rare disease family. Lucky me. Um, and it was really difficult. And I was going to doctor after doctor, and I was being what's called specialty siloed, where that doesn't
mm,
fall into my specialty. Or are you just really nervous? And it's one of those things where it's like, I know my body, I've lived with it my whole life. Something's wrong.
yeah.
And it took it really took me taking all my records, starting to research a lot of medical conditions. I know what words mean that I can't pronounce or spell, and I decided to actually treat my health case like a forensic investigation. And when I did that, I took things that appeared to be in the background and I put them into the foreground. And I actually was able to diagnose one of my diseases that way. And
That's very cool.
yeah,
I
now
mean,
I
there's an obvious application of artificial intelligence
yeah,
in this space, right? Because
yes.
we're already seeing AI improve diagnostics in many, fields of medicine. Um,
Mhm.
and then there's the next generation, what we see with Brian Johnson and stuff like that, looking at the deep metrics to manage healthcare better. But we need, so we need infrastructure for digital healthcare.
We do.
We need to share patient records. There's not a lot of incentive to do that in the US market because it's heavily privatized, but there'd be bigger incentives to do that in places like the EU and
Right.
China, for example. So, what is
Bringing it back
next?
to
Yeah,
cybersecurity.
what does next generation healthcare digital infrastructure look like so that you didn't have to do all of that research, that you could have applied an artificial intelligence to it?
Well,
Because right now it's all this disparate information, right?
it's interesting that you said that because in 2019, I created a concept for a global healthcare system where you would be utilizing AI and machine learning, but that was only part of how the system would work. The AI would help select your doctors, but you would have a doctor team that would be selected for you by AI or by a secure crowd if you chose that doctor. And you would have, say, you have a GI doctor working on your case from California, but now you need a hematologist, and the best one for your case, is in Sweden. And, maybe you have a cardiologist in Japan. And all of these doctors would be working around the patient, and the system would be taking everything that it's learning on this particular case, and it would learn too until it was predictive. But the really cool thing with that too is that now all of a sudden you've broken through the specialty silos and you have doctors that are working with other specialists in other countries, and they're being upskilled by each case significantly. And you know, a big part of that too was utilizing AI to help really drive where this was going, but also to look at things that maybe we didn't really look at before, like social media. You know, I used to ride horses, and you know, it could very well have been that maybe I had Lyme's disease, but I
Yeah.
don't. But that was really kind
But
of
you
the
know,
thinking
getting the
behind it.
AI in to challenge this is the key element. But look at this part of the show, because we are wrapping up. We do like to get a bit futuristic here, right? And so I want to test you a bit on this. You know, like we talked briefly about quantum day, you know, quantum supremacy,
Yeah, let's
and
get into
things
that
like that.
now.
So I want to take us 10 or 20 years out and tell us about how you think that's going to evolve. You know, like the US military is spending like $1 trillion on post-quantum encryption stuff right now. We know Apple and JP Morgan Chase are spending big dollars on it, but that's about it. Right. You know, there's not a lot of spend as yet on quantum stuff, which the cloud can probably fix a lot of this. But you know, give us a bit of a view in terms of, you know, 10 years out or 20 years out, in terms of how you think this cybersecurity infrastructure and everything's what's it going to look like?
It will look nothing like it does today. There will be remnants of the past, but AI is really kind of the first step. Quantum is the first step, but I believe a lot of the technologies that we'll be utilizing and that we'll work with don't exist yet. And this is kind of the dawn of, you know, that next technical revolution. And I believe there's a lot of people who are afraid, you know, AI is going to take my job. Well, it may, but the jobs that you may have in 10 years, they probably don't exist yet. And I see it
Okay, but bring it
going.
over to security for us. So bring it back to cybersecurity, because the topic is quantum security, quantum
Yeah, if
encryption.
you were asked by Kamala Harris to come and advise on post-quantum encryption and security, what sort of things would you be recommending to the administration to make sure the US is prepared for this?
Well, I would recommend more funding. I would recommend that, you know, we really look at this cybersecurity problem, and not just quantum encryption. I mean, we're talking about all of the different types of emerging tech that we have, and really invest in those emerging technologies like quantum, because, you know, again, I do not believe that the world will look the same in 10 years, in 5 years, that it does today. Even in terms of cybersecurity and in terms of sociology.
What might be different in 5 years?
People will be interfacing with machines a lot more than they do now. There will be, I don't want to go all Star Trek, we are bored,
Go
but
for
you
it.
know,
Go for it.
No,
That's the
that's
show.
this is the show. Yeah, please. We like Star
I'm
Trek and
such a
Borg.
nerd. I used to catalog my Star Trek tapes by star date.
Okay. But look, if you go out in the future, are people still going to use passwords? Are we still going to use fingerprints for biometrics? Are we going to still be scanning our eyes? Do you think,
We
was
had
there
this
some other
debate with
method?
Bruce Schneier, right? But
I think there's a few different mechanisms that could work. I think that there may be implants. Uh, you know, they actually have these now.
Yeah, that's not
right, the
futuristic. That's
RFID.
Yeah,
now.
Yeah.
that's not futuristic, but different types of implants. I hate to say it, but do you remember the first Mission Impossible movie where they look at your eye and they know everything about you, and they maybe not.
Yeah.
So I think that
But
the
we could do
world,
that with DNA. Like we can now read someone's DNA and we can tell them what food they should eat.
Hmm.
Right.
we
You know,
certainly can. And I
and now
believe,
they're saying they'll be able to like take a child's DNA and tell you what like in the womb, and be able to then extrapolate that using an algorithm to show you what they'll look like at 50
Your
years
child's
old.
going to be an Olympic athlete.
Yeah, it's pretty
But
crazy.
it's
just make sure she
insane.
eats a lot of spinach.
But I
Imagine that.
believe that the interface between humans and machines are going to be, we're going to be much more connected with each other.
Okay, that to me sounds like we're broadening the attack surface once again, 'cause we're
Yeah.
just connecting more stuff. So every time we make an advance like that, it creates another opening or another vulnerability. And
But
that's
these
just
things
it, right?
are
That's the future.
granted, things move really fast in our cyber world, but you know, at the same
Could you-
time, these things are incremental steps. Like if I was in a coma, I think about this sometimes. If I was in a coma in 2002 and I woke up today, I would be like, what? But because I've lived,
What are these
you know, those
sci-fi
years,
supercomputers you carry around in your pocket? You know, it must be worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
seriously, I mean,
Yeah.
you know, I really do. I believe that it will be a much more combined human machine type of living.
It seems the trajectory. I mean, some people may buck that, of course, but then they're going to be limited. This is all when we talk about digital inclusion stuff and we talk about, other aspects, health inclusion and financial inclusion, pushed off that. If you're not in that highly autonomous system, it's going to be very difficult for you. So people who want to live off grid and things like that. I mean, that's been depicted.
Yeah, but
in
listening to the
certain-
two of you, I think I'm starting to think maybe I should start to disconnect from the grid more. Brett, I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to taking a hike in the mountains where I won't have a
I
phone
know
and I
you're
won't have.
heading off, aren't
know,
you?
I
Yeah.
am. I am. I'm going to
We gotta
disconnect
wrap up.
entirely. Hey, Tyler, it's been a great pleasure having you on the show, and I'm sure many of the listeners would love to find out more about what you're working on. Where can they find you on the web?
you can find me on LinkedIn, Tyler Cohen Wood. You can find me on Facebook, Tyler Cohen Wood. You just Tyler Cohen Wood.
Okay, so you're on socials, and how about your website?
That is in the works right now,
Okay.
but
Okay, cool.
it will
Cool.
be tylercohenwood.com.
Well, super to have you on the
Dark
show.
Kryptonite,
Or
do you have Dark
if you-
Kryptonite have a setup?
Oh yes, darkkryptonite.com, and
Okay.
it's spelled. I'll send you the spelling for the show
Okay,
notes.
great. We can
Or if
tweet
you
it
want
out
to
on
follow my
social.
dog, you can follow Mo the Schnoodle on Instagram.
But does your dog have a blog? That's what I really want to know.
No, he doesn't yet, but he's becoming an influencer.
There you go. Yeah, that's crazy.
Great. Well, thank
Yeah.
you for joining us. And
You know,
thanks,
what was
folks,
that
for
quote
listening.
about on the internet? No one knows you're a dog. Well, here we go. Another cybersecurity.
Exactly.
That dog is just another point of vulnerability as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
They're going to hack your dog. Thanks, Tyler, for joining us on the show. And a big shout out to the folks at Provoke Media who make our show possible. Kevin Hirschhorn, our engineer, Elizabeth Severance, our producer. And we want to thank our audience for listening. We love the fact that people engage with us in socials and send us suggestions for the kinds of guests and topics they want to hear about. So keep that coming. It's great fun to hear about it. Meanwhile, Brett and I will continue to bring you a new futurist, a person who's thinking about, influencing, shaping the future every single week. And we'll be back next week. And until then, we will see you in
the future.
Bye.